Betsy DeVos is the nominee to head the Department of Education. And while there are many people who've been nominated to be in Trump's cabinet who have major conflicts of interest or a lack of experience in the departments they'll be running, she really has the full Monty. She is not an educator, doesn't know how to run the Department of Education, has no real interest in education. She's interested in destroying education. She's philosophically opposed to the stated mission of the Department of Education. And her ties to super PACs and charter schools raise concerns about possible conflicts of interest as well. And so while she might not be the most dangerous person nominated to be in Trump's cabinet, she also has received the most ridicule and the most disapproval, not just from Democrats. And so we have some exciting news, I guess, today. The question has been for the past few weeks, will any Republicans stand up and vote against these nominees? And in the case of Betsy DeVos, the answer is apparently, thankfully, yes. And so we have a couple of brief statements from Republican senators who will oppose her. The first, Susan Collins.
Madam President, I come to the floor to announce a very difficult decision that I have made, and that is to vote against the confirmation of Betsy DeVos to be our nation's next Secretary of Education.
So I want to thank her. I also want to thank Jared Jackson for sitting through that very slowly delivered speech, but she's saying the right thing, and that's what's important there.
She is, yes.
We also have Lisa Murkowski.
But, Mr. President, I conclude my remarks to make clear that my colleagues know firmly that I do not intend to vote on final passage to support Mrs. DeVos to be Secretary of Education. I cannot support this nominee.
So that's impressive. We thought that it might be the case. I believe Cenk and I talked last week about Murkowski in particular, and Susan Collins, I think there were some rumors. But it's good news to see two saying they will actually vote against her.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this plays out, because for the first time during these hearings, you have Republicans crossing over and saying that they will not vote in favor of one of Trump's nominees. Betsy DeVos is honestly one of the worst. It's hard to pick which nominee is the worst, because you have, the CEO of ExxonMobil, you have someone who has deep ties to Goldman Sachs and other financial institutions that just destroyed the lives of so many people by foreclosing on their homes, in a lot of cases wrongfully so. So in this case, though, what makes me worry is, the destruction of opportunities for people who are born into disadvantaged communities or disadvantaged households. The only hope that people have of climbing up an economic ladder is education. And Betsy DeVos, with her lack of experience in anything related to education or curriculum, has fought tooth and nail by funding right-wing politicians to privatize education, to push for charter schools. If you just look specifically at what she did with charter schools in Michigan, destruction. A lot of those charter schools are underperforming. They don't have to abide by the same standards that public schools have to abide by. In a lot of cases, they don't have to focus on science-based education, and they can go ahead and teach religious garbage instead. Sorry if you're religious, but it's not fact-based, and I'd rather be in a situation where
it is alternative fact-based.
It's alternative fact-based, so I mean, do with that what you will. But I worry about the privatization of education. I worry about more right-wingers sucking public money out of public schools and then funneling them into private schools in the form of vouchers. That creates a system where public schools fail because you're defunding them, and then you start funding private education where you can teach all sorts of things. You can teach whatever you want because you don't have to abide by the same standards as public schools.
Yeah, we set up our system of public education and the Department of Education to make sure that we have a populace that is up to the task of being the citizenry for a democracy, and to make sure that also we have a strong economy, because you need educated people for that. We didn't set up all this so the money could be redirected to set up a network of Christian madrasas across the country.
So I have to note one other thing. For anyone out there who's been concerned about the quality of public education and how it's not up to par with what you would hope it would be, just understand this. Public education is funded by a very, very questionable model. So it's based on property taxes in a lot of places. Some school districts have actually mitigated that because they realize it doesn't work. But if you're living in a poor area, well, property prices are going to be much lower, right? Property taxes are going to be much lower. So the schools in those areas are going to be severely underfunded. So oftentimes you'll see that schools in that case don't do as well. You have to kind of reform the way that these schools are funded. And then also, again, a lot of conservative lawmakers have been defunding education, public education, and funneling that money into private schools. So if you like the vouchers and you're like, yeah, I got school choice, okay, consider the fact that as soon as they privatize all of these schools, you think they're going to come to you and be like, oh, here's some help so you can send your kids to school, so you can send your kids to private school. We know you can't afford it. I mean, look at what Republicans do when it comes to Pell Grants and federal funding to help people afford college. They don't care about that. They want to cut that as well. So they would do the same thing for grade schools. Yeah. I just want to make sure that people aren't voting against their best interest, because I think in a lot of cases they're like, school choice, it's great. No. They don't care about giving you a quality education.
Can Betsy DeVos actually be stopped? Okay, well, if all of the Senate's Democrats vote against DeVos, she would have 50 votes if the remaining Republicans backed her, with Vice President Mike Pence potentially breaking the tie. No Democrats have publicly backed DeVos right now. In fact, even Senator Joe Manchin, who is technically a Democrat, considered one of the most vulnerable Democrats up for re-election in the coming election, announced on Wednesday that he will not support DeVos. And that was sort of a question, as it is on so many of these nominees. And so right now, you have exactly enough that Mike Pence could break the tie.
Right.
If you have one more, then you can actually stop her from becoming the nominee. And although I have no special love for Collins or Murkowski, I think that while it would have been great to see far more Republicans going against not just DeVos, but a number of the other nominees, we do have to recognize, well, first of all, they have the electoral pressure of being in states that are not necessarily like hardcore red, but they're actually taking a risk here, especially because so few other Republicans have done anything like this. If they do vote against her and she gets voted down, Donald Trump is not going to be happy about that. And we know that he is one to hold a vendetta against Democrats, but also against Republicans.
Oh, he doesn't care what political affiliation they're associated with. What he cares is whether or not these individuals are loyal to him. And voting against DeVos is showing that you're disloyal. So will there be ramifications for these lawmakers?
Yeah.
Sure, I have no doubt that something will happen. Maybe there'll be some nasty tweet later tonight. But I do give them credit because, look, in the case of both Democrats and Republicans, I want the votes to make sense, okay? So if the person who's been nominated is actually qualified and actually has some good policy ideas and good experience, I don't care if it was a Republican who nominated them. That person is worthy of the job, so go ahead and vote them, into the positions that they've been nominated for. But unfortunately, in this case, all of Trump's picks have been super questionable.
Yeah.
You can help build independent media. We're now doing fundraising to get 4 new investigative reporting teams out there and be the watchers on the wall. We're not going to let Trump get away with anything. We're not going to let the establishment get away with anything. You help us build it. TYTnetwork.com/go. Be part of the solution.